Good afternoon and welcome to the Falcon Oil and Gas Investor Presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated in the right corner of your screen. Just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll. And I'd now like to hand you over to CEO Philip O'Quigley. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for that. And welcome everyone, wherever you are. I'm going to go through just a pretty short presentation today because I want to spend more of the time really on some great questions that were submitted prior to this meeting. And thanks everyone in advance for submitting any questions, which I hope we'll be able to address most of them. But let me jump into, it's only a few slides of a presentation, just to talk and kind of refresh everyone where we are. And what I'm talking about today is our acreage in the Beetaloo position, in the Beetaloo Basin in Northern Territory, Australia, about 600 kilometers south of Darwin. The blue you see on screen representing 3 exploration permits, which we, together with our partner Origin Energy, own 4.6 million acres. So it's quite an extensive position within the basin. It's about the size of Wales, if you're thinking of it in terms of your own geography, or Leinster in Ireland. So it's a vast area, and our net 22.5% of that is a huge 1 million acres roughly. While I'm on this, just to draw your attention to a couple of the blocks around us which are of significant interest. EP 161, you may have seen results there by Santos through their junior partner Tamboran, announced about a couple of weeks ago. Pretty encouraging results, actually. I'll talk a bit more about that because there's some good questions on those results later on. But they did drill 2 horizontals, frack them, flow them, and they announced initial flow rates from those, which are, as I said, very encouraging. This year is going to see an increased level of activity across the basin. We've got a testing of a well here by Empire. That will probably be June or July event. Tamboran have 100% of this EP 136. So they're going to be drilling a horizontal well here, probably splitting that in June of this year. And then what I want to talk today about is what we're going to be doing in 2022, which is basically going back here to drill another 2 big wells. Just looking, same map, just in terms of a depth view of the Beetaloo Basin. This is our Amungi well, the horizontal well, the first horizontal well drilled in the basin back in 2016. We went in and tested this well in September last year, and announced really encouraging results at about a 5-fold increase in flow rate. These 2 Tanambarini wells, 2H and 3H were the wells that were drilled and flow tested a couple of weeks ago, and at least the results were announced. And then this is the Maverick well that Tamboran will be drilling, and then the Carpentaria well. So that gives you kind of an aerial view in terms of this depth here. For us is about 2,500 meters. You get over to the deeper part of the basin here at 3,500 meters, and then we have this shallower here in and around about 1,900, as was our really good exploration well, the Valkyrie 76 last year. So let me talk a bit more detail on what are we doing this year. So first thing out is around about early May, late April, we'll be out acquiring 40 square kilometers of 3D seismic in and around the Amungi area. So that's the first order of work, part of the 2022 and stage 3 work program. And then we will follow that up with the drilling of 2 2,000 plus meter horizontal wells from the same Amungi pad that we had the success on our first horizontal. We'll obviously then do a frac stim on both of those wells, and then run a production test, which will run into 2023, 90 days and maybe as long as 180 days. To get a full detailed analysis of what the decline curve looks like, and hopefully, what an EUR, an estimated ultimate recovery on a well could look like in the future. Other work we'll be doing alongside, the big part of the program of seismic and the drilling of the 2 wells is obviously going back to our very successful 76 well and carrying out, a lot of detailed analysis. We did acquire 93 meters of core while drilling through the Valkyrie last year. So that's in Houston being analyzed right now. And then we'll do further evaluation of the Kyella well, which is the well that we still a bit puzzled as to why it didn't flow and didn't work, but certainly Origin are not giving up on this well. And we've got quite a lot of work ahead of us in terms of trying to get a better understanding of what happened at Kayala. The objectives of our 22 program as it pertains to our drilling and seismic, well, the seismic really is optimizing the horizontal well trajectories, you know, and identifying, for example, natural fractures and being able to orientate the wells, you know, to avoid any natural fractures and avoid what we encountered back when we drilled our 26 horizontal well and we had that casing deformation issue. So that's a great, you know, having the 3D in advance of our horizontal drilling would be a huge benefit to, as I said, orientating the well trajectories. The two wells themselves, you know, why people are asking, why are you drilling two wells off the same pad? Haven't you already proven up this area? Well, look, we've proven it up to a certain extent. This is a case of going back and doing it even on a bigger scale. So we're going to go to at least 2,000 meters. Depending how the drilling is going at the time, we might go beyond the 2,000 meters, and that's in each well. And this will obviously help us demonstrate, you know, the real scalability, being able to do longer laterals, and then how cost effective it is, in fact, to do, you know, more than two wells on the same pad. So all building to hopefully what will be, you know, pilot development programs into 23, and then stepping up even further. So that's kind of the backdrop in terms of the program. Other great news going on, certainly around this part of the world, relating to, you know, the gas market, which has become of significant interest internationally, in fact, well outside, beyond Australia. And largely because, you know, Australia is now the largest exporter of LNG in the world. So Europe are looking to Australia to solve some of their energy worries and a pending crisis, depending on what happens between Russia, Ukraine, and so on. Gas prices here are at an all-time high. Santos, I think they sold all 11 of their cargoes in Q4 last year through Darwin, which is only 600 kilometers up the road from the Beetaloo. They sold those at an average price of $29 an MCF, which is, you know, equivalent to $180 oil. It's about 7 times the same price for gas in the US of A. So we're in a great place geographically. We have a huge market. Both domestically on the East Coast, but also north into the Asian market. And with this kind of pricing environment, it makes reaching our goal this year, or certainly at the end of stage 3 program, our goal of a declaration of commerciality on some part of the Beetaloo much, much more attainable. So I won't go further than that in terms of the presentation. I think if we can just maybe jump over to the Q&A, there's about 20 very good questions that were submitted. And if I maybe just come back to Alessandro to put those questions to us, and then I can hopefully answer most of them.
Perfect, Philip. Thank you very much for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated in the right corner of your screen. But just while the company take a few moments to review those questions submitted today, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed by your investor dashboard. Philip, as you just said, we received a number of pre-submitted questions from investors, and I wanted to start the Q&A session with these. The first one reads as follows. Is there a challenge with the geology? Our initial frac at Amunji was only partial. It seems that Tambourins was only partial too. What precautions are we going to take to ensure that the planned new horizontals don't suffer the same challenges?
Yeah, look, geology by its very nature, it's always going to present challenges. Geology in the Beetaloo, you know, it's no different in that regard. I can't really comment in any great detail about the challenges that Tambourine encountered, but at Munji, you know, we did suspect way back in 2016 we had a casing deformation, which was caused by a natural fault in the reservoir, and that limited production. The test we ran back in August last year confirmed this, and Origin was then able to, you know, announce a normalized flow rate measured over, you know, effectively 1,000 meters of around 5,000 MCF a day. This year, you know, prior to drilling the 2 wells planned, we're going to be shooting, as I said earlier, 40 square kilometers of 3D, and this will allow us to identify these natural fractures if there are any, and then orientate the well away from them. And that then hopefully will reduce the risk that we encountered in terms of this casing deformation, and then have a much, much bigger and better result out of that.
That's great. A shorter question here. Will you need to raise any cash this year?
Yeah, everyone loves to ask that question. We are a resource company, an E&P company, but we're a very, very fortunate position. Our last reported cash balance, I think, would have been September. I think we're around about $9 million US dollars. And as stated in our press release last month, between the balance of the carry, which Origin have been paying their way since 2014 through various carries that we negotiated with them as part of the farm out, there is still a significant balance of that carry left, where Origin are paying 100% of a certain amount up until the carry is exhausted. But between that carry and our own resources, we are fully funded for the remainder of 2022. So the simple answer to your question is no, we don't need to raise any money this year.
Thanks for that, Philip. In your view, is it likely that your existing 6.6 TCF resource estimate will be increased in the next few months as a result of yours and others' recent drill results?
Yeah, good question. I get this one a lot, actually, and for a good reason. We did demonstrate a 5-fold increase in flow rate back in September. So people would naturally jump to a conclusion, well, a 5-fold increase in flow, what does that do to increasing your resources? Simple answer is actually not a lot. And the reason is the aerial extent which we applied, the workings and calculations to come up with the 6.6 TCF, that hasn't increased. The aerial extent of 1/8 of our total acreage, that remains the same. What has changed, or what will change in the near future, subject to getting good results at the end of the 22 program, combined with all the other information we have, what we hope to see is a reclassification of a lot, if not all, of the 6.6 TCF or contingent into reserve. And that will give you a huge increase in the value proposition for Falcon without any necessary increase in any volume.
That's perfect. The next question comes from a long-time believer who asks, what is it going to take to see Falcon's stock price higher? Is the goal to produce one day to achieve higher price, or to continue in exploration and development only?
Yeah, I love this question. Yeah, keep believing. Definitely. 2021, that was probably our last year of exploration in the Beetaloo, and I'd ranked the Valkyrie 76 as an exploration well, and a very successful exploration well. Yeah, our work program this year, it's focused around the Mungie, an area we've already explored and to somewhat has already even been appraised. So this year's work, assuming success, should actually lead to pilot production in 2023. But I think it's important to point out it's not necessary to get into production to have a significantly increased value that will be reflected in our share price. Real production, pilot production might be the end of 23 into 24. Real production is 25, 26. We don't need to be anywhere close to production. We need to prove it up and to get to this notional concept of, declaration of commerciality, proving up IP flow rates of, between 2 and 3 million scuffs of gas a day measured on over 1,000 meters over, the first 30 days. That will change the value of Falcon long before, years before we're in full-scale production. So keep believing.
Thank you. The next question reads as follows. I purchased under FOLGF years ago. Are my shares still a recognized position?
Yeah, the FOLGF, it's on the kind of I think what do they call it, the pink sheets. It's an unregulated exchange platform in the US. I don't know a huge amount about it. I know there's many shareholders who actually own their shares through it, but you'd have to talk directly back to your own stockbroker just to know where you stand with those shares. There's nothing to be concerned about, but I'm more familiar with the TSXV and the AIM market, that are the two regulated markets that our shares are traded on. But I've never heard of anyone having a problem with shares on the FOLGF platform.
Thank you. Philip, could you provide a brief outline of what additional work slash research the JV might undertake in 2022 on the Kyella? Can one assume, as part of the additional research, the partners are talking to subsurface dynamics in Canada and/or other firms with similar expertise?
Yeah, look, I think as I've said before, Kyella is and remains of significant interest to the Origin JV. And Origin, certainly, they'll leave no stone unturned in researching the Kyella and trying to get a better understanding of why it didn't flow on its own. We went in with nitrogen on 3 different occasions. It worked for a while, but we could never get it to sustain a flow rate long enough to put it on an extended production test. But as I said, Origin are committed to doing the work this year to get a better understanding. Whether they talk to subsurface dynamics, I mean, they may, but they'll certainly be talking to everyone they can to get an expert's opinion on what could unlock the Kyella, because with the liquids content we have here, it is of significant interest and will remain so for some time.
That's great. Can one assume that Falcon can put off for another 12 to 18 months amounts payable to cancel the royalty payment? Would the cost of an extension again be the equivalent of a similar financial charge?
Yeah, so look, for the benefit of the listeners who are not familiar enough with the overriding royalty regime, Falcon does have a call option to acquire and extinguish a 2% privately held overriding royalty on our acreage. It's a call option, so it's up to us if we want to exercise that call option, and the cost of exercising is $6 million US, which we could choose to do by the 30th of April and then extinguish that 2%. We previously acquired and extinguished 5% of an overriding royalty from that same privately held group of families way back in 2014. And we also acquired and extinguished a further 4% overriding royalty from a private family based out of Zurich. And that was done also a number of years. So we did have 12%. We're down to 3%. We probably may, I don't know what we'll do, but we haven't actually made any decision what we're going to do. We'll make that decision, closer to the 30th of April, whether we, buy out the call option, extinguish it. Do we go and renegotiate an extension, or do we just leave it as it is as the royalty and come back to some other day? But no decision has been made at this stage.
Thank you. The next question asks if you were able to disclose what is the total budget in 2022 for phase 3 of the Origin/Falcon program.
Yeah, so Origin are the operator, they're the one that put the budgets together, but they don't break out in their own financials the detail of the CapEx for 2022. So we're not at liberty to be able to, disclose the exact 2022 CapEx. So, the stage 3 program, as I've outlined, it's a pretty robust one. It includes, as I said, the acquisition of the 40 square kilometers and the drilling of 2 horizontal wells. It's a big program, but at least, we are fully funded for all of 2022, which is great news.
Just turning to the next question. Since the original press release last November on the preliminary petrophysics and mud gas composition from the Valkyrie 76 S2-1 vertical well, are you in the position to share with us any additional findings that have come to light since?
Yeah, so look, again, for all listeners who may not be up to speed, we announced back in, October, November, preliminary petrophysical details of our Valkyrie 76 well. And it was particularly good, especially when you look across, however way you want to look at it, the greater than 50 meters thickness of the B shale, the porosity at 7.7%, total organic carbon, the TOC at 4.3%. So it was a fantastic well. During the drilling, we also acquired 93 meters of core. That was then shipped to Houston. That will be, analyzed over a period of about 6 months. So we haven't got any of that back yet. And then we'll update. We don't have anything up right now to update the market with, but we will update the market as soon as that, we're in a position to do so. And, in the meantime, Origin ourselves are really, really excited about Valkyrie 76 and the surrounding area.
Thank you very much. The next question says that there's been lots of publicity in the recent weeks from Origin and Santos on the extraordinary high spot prices obtained from the LNG cargoes. Could you advise us where longer-term fixed price contracts are trading, and if the latter are maintained, in what way might it impact analysis and government views on the future commercial development of the Beetaloo?
Yeah, look, thanks for this question. Actually, it's another good one, and I've touched on it already. In terms of the pricing. Santos did get an average of $29 for Q4 for all of its shipments, not just one, but for all of its Q4 shipments out of Darwin. Woodside and Origin achieved similar prices for their LNG cargoes during the same quarter. And all operators basically are enjoying the benefit of these higher prices. If you look at the kind of the benchmark is the JKM, it's the Japan Korea marker for LNG. I think going out to March 23 next year, it's somewhere between now, it's between 24 and 28 US dollars per MCF. So these extraordinary high prices look set out into the future, which is really, really good news for anyone looking to develop the Beetaloo. In terms of government views and support, we've huge support locally and federally, and that has been growing in recent years, and now even more so in recent months. This pricing environment will do nothing except to enhance the views and the support coming from government, and also enhances our own view in terms of the real commerciality of the Beetaloo. In a pricing environment like this, it gets very, very easy in terms of what you need for flow rates and EUR per well. This kind of a pricing environment makes it, a very, very achievable task indeed.
Thank you. Just turning to the next question, which says, there have been some questions raised about the recent 5mm cubic feet / day estimated flow rate from the Amungi H1 well. How confident are you and Origin about this very commercial flow rate, with only 4 of the last 11 fracs contributing 85% of the actual flow from that well?
Yeah, look, this is this is probably a super key question to ask. And again, thank you for submitting it. When we went back to test the Amungi well, it was done on the hypothesis that we had what we call a casing deformation caused by a natural fracture that we thought and suspected might have limited the flow of gas from an area beyond the deformation. And I guess to understand, the implications of a deformation, think of a deformation as someone, standing on your garden hose as you're trying to water your garden, and all of a sudden the flow of water is down to a trickle. Well, that's, what we suspected was the case. And when we went back in, we ran an engineering tool with Scalability, which simply measures the velocity along different take points of the wellbore. Now, I'm not an engineer, but I'm told by the engineers that it is exactly that. It is engineering. The data doesn't lie. There's hardly any subjectivity involved in the analysis. Scalability did a very detailed report for Origin. Origin did their own work on the data that came up, and in fact, they hired a third party. So all three entities all concurred with what we announced, and Origin actually announced in this 5-fold increase, or the 5,000 MCF a day as posed in the question. And as to how confident we are, well, I think based on all three coming up and concluding to the same, I think we're pretty confident that it's a real number. It's not an extrapolated number. It's pretty real. Having said that, we still do need to go back this year and drill these 2,000 plus meter wells, to prove it up on a much bigger scale. That yes, we can do it, and it's not just over 200 meters, which is the case for our 2016 well.
Thank you very much indeed. Just moving on, how soon do you expect Origin to announce that they have a drilling rig secured for this year 2 well drilling program at Amungi? And can you explain what a hot rig is and why that would be preferred booking for this year?
Yeah, the hot rig topic. Look, first of all, we'll update the market on key operational issues as we progress through the year. Maybe not down to the level of detail of signing, rig contracts. But rest assured, we have our eyes on a rig negotiations. I can't remember where we are, well advanced, or maybe even have been executed. And it's not a cold rig. And what a cold rig is, to answer your question, a cold rig is a rig that's been lying idle in a yard, and it's a bit like Humpty Dumpty. Somebody comes along and kind of puts it back together again. Hopefully there's no missing parts, mobilize it out to the field. And then you got to go and find a crew, most of whom have probably never operated on the rig. So you got a cold rig out in the field, hasn't been tested for a few years, with a crew that's never worked on it. And that's the nature of a cold rig. A hot rig is one that's been operational for the last 12 months, and you're simply mobilizing a rig onto site with the crew that had been working on it for the last 12 months or even longer. That is your definition of a hot rig. In terms of our preferred booking, well, when you're trying to run a program in what is, in an oil and gas world, a pretty remote part of the world. And by that, I mean, we're 2,500 kilometers from the nearest oil field. So therefore, we're 2,500 kilometers from the oil field services companies. The last thing you really want in any way is a cold rig. So our preference is most clearly to go for a hot rig, fully crewed and ready to go.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from an investor who asks if you could give your thoughts on the Santos recent flow rates and how that impacts all operators in the Beetaloo, and whether you think these Santos flow rates will impact their overall plans for drilling in 2023.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Santos themselves announced the flow rates. It would have been their partner, Tambourine, certainly the one I've seen. And Tambourine indicated, a normalized flow rate over 1,000 meters of around about 2,500 MCF a day. It's a pretty good result. It's not just my view. I mean, I've spoken to many people on these results far more technically able to interpret it than I am, and I've spoken to Origin. These are good results at this stage of appraising the Beetaloo. And, there's talk about future optimization of fracture stimulation, which will come, and learning will improve, and optimization of frac will enhance flow rates going forward. As to what Santos are going to do in 23, I have no idea. I couldn't answer what they're going to do, other than that maybe guess that on this level of success that I think is success, they might like to look to do what we're going to do in 23, would be to step up to pilot development program around their Tanumbirini wells.
That's perfect. If Falcon sells their 22.5% share of the Beetaloo, how will this be distributed to shareholders?
Yeah, so look, if we just simply sell the 22.5% in the Beetaloo, as in selling at the asset to a third party, just let's say for 1,000, the first distribution would be a tax distribution to the Australian authorities to the tune of 30%, i.e. 300. We then distribute 700 up to our parent company, Canada, and make a second distribution to Canadian tax authorities of about another 30%, or 210. So we'd be left with, rounded up 500 up to 1,000. And then we make a distribution to our shareholders by way of a dividend, so you can all pay 50% income tax on the dividend. But we won't do any of that. There won't be distributions to the tax authorities across Australia, Canada, and dividend income tax to our shareholders. Our view and the work we have done, and the work that my CFO, Anne, specifically has done in terms of structuring the company, that when we look to sell, or somebody wants to buy our 22.5% interest in the Beetaloo, they buy the company, the Topco, and they simply just acquire your shares, or your shareholder shares, for cash, and you pay your capital gains tax on that. There will be no issue of distributions by Falcon.
That's great. The next question asks if Origin, Santos, and Empire are working together behind the scenes to share intelligence and data to help the Beetaloo cause.
Yeah, when I talk about future optimization of fracture stimulation, it's beyond that. It's future optimization of everything to do with developing the Beetaloo. We all get smarter, individually as we go along, and learning from our own experiences. Collaboration between all operators can only be good. And it's something I'm very keen to promote and actively promote in the Beetaloo between Origin, Santos, Empire, Tambourine, and ourselves. There is a lot of collusion and talking and chatting. We all know each other pretty well. It's not, as some might think, as a competitive environment. We're selling gas, which is now an international commodity. It's not like a domestic commodity anymore. It's an international commodity, just as oil is, into a very large market. There's no need to look upon each of us to look as competitors to each other. So the more collaboration that goes on, the better. And as I said, we all know each other. Doesn't even have to be behind the scenes chat. I mean, we can all kind of openly share. Data in itself is sensitive, yes, but you can easily have arrangements between various companies. You show me yours, and I'll show you mine. So if we have, for example, 2 well results this year, and Santos say, well, look, you show me the results of those, and we'll show you, and why wouldn't you? So that will be something we'll all work for, because we'll all benefit from it, for sure.
That's great. Just turning to the next question, which asks if this year's operations are successful, what valuation would this give for our acreage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. Mostly around North America, shale plays tend to change hands, and they're always commented on in the market in terms of the deal that was done on a $1 per acre basis. It's just been the way it has been for many, many years. And we follow this quite closely, actually, with our broker Senkos, in fact, keep a full track of all the M&A deals going on in North America, and they can quite confidently tell me that exploration acreage typically changes hands at $1,000, appraisal acreage changes hands at $4,000, and then proven and producing acreage can change hands at around $12,000 an acre. In terms of your question, on success, we'd like to think our area around the Mungie is now in that appraised success at the end of stage 3. But that's not all our acreage. Let's say we apply that to the 1/8, which is the same aerial extent of the acres we applied our resource calculation to. But you could, rightly assume that 1/8 of our acreage, and our net acreage, for example, is 1 million acres. So on 1/8 of that, you could apply a value as high as $4,000 per acre, but not for all of our acreage, but for the 1/8. The balance of the acreage might still remain in that exploration category, but it will have an enhanced value because it'll become real exploration as opposed to maybe exploration. It's because we're now in a much better address. If we have success at a Mungie, the value around us will also increase, but not to the same extent as to the area directly around Mungie. But either way, all the drilling that goes on improves the value on an acre basis. And right now we're trading at something like $100 or $150 an acre for our current acreage, which is very, very, very low valuation indeed.
That's great. The next question relates to Santos and reads as follows. At the end of last year, Santos got itself into difficulties with its landowner. Do you envisage Origin/Falcon getting into similar difficulties? And if not, why not?
Yeah, this question refers to a case between Santos and the owner of the Tanumbirini cattle station, called the Rallan Australia. Rallan accused Santos of failing to meet strict obligations in terms of disclosing their proposed drilling of 2 horizontal wells, and a decision was handed down in favor of actually Rallan's claims in a court back in December. Look, Origin has a really, really good track record, as does Santos actually, have a really good track record in terms of dealing with all stakeholders. Mistakes like perhaps Santos made can happen, has happened, could happen in the future. When I was farming out the Beetaloo in 2013 and 14, I was very cognizant of Origin's track record for stakeholder engagement in Queensland, where they're drilling up to 100 wells a year. You have to be on top of your game in terms of stakeholder engagement. And what I've seen, in the work that they've done in the Beetaloo and the Northern Territory, the kind of work I've seen, particularly you'll all have seen the work that they did in terms of the pepper inquiry, and if it wasn't for Origin's input into that and how they managed all stakeholders during that process, we might not be out the other side of the moratorium. So you can still have a slip up. There's no guarantee, but Origin invest, again, as does Santos and all the operators, invest a huge amount of resources, time, and everything else, and rightly so, in engaging in all stakeholders. So I'd say the likelihood of a difficulty is low, is what I can say. You can never be, completely at zero, but it's very, very low.
Thank you very much indeed. Just turning to the next one. In October, November last year, Tamboran were briefing investors that they envisaged by the end of the first quarter this year, they would be in a position to dictate how, when, and where infrastructure should be created in the basin in the next 2 to 3 years. There is less talk of this last week. Do you think this is a reflection that most of it, if not all players now realise, given the size of Origin/Falcon property, this in reality was always the case? And from Falcon's standpoint, does this impact future values?
I didn't attend the investor briefing where Tamboran may have made the claim that they're in a position to dictate how, when, and where infrastructure. Seems a bit of a stretch for any company at this stage where the Beetaloo is at to be making such claims. And by infrastructure, I presume the person asking the question, you're talking about pipelines in particular. There's 2 big pipeline companies operating in Australia. APA, which is the Australian owned entity, and then you've got Gemina, which is owned by State Grid, which are, they're the largest utility company in the world. They'll build whatever pipelines need being built. That's their business model. That's their game. They're in the infrastructure game. And if you want a pipeline from, the Beetaloo all the way to Adelaide, they'll build it if you provide, a guarantee to deliver gas down and pay the tariff. That's what our commitment would be, if we're building is to agree to a certain tariff and a certain volume of gas to go through the various pipelines. But I don't think it's a bit early stage to be dictating where and when these are going to be built. But we all have a good relationship with the pipeline companies who build the pipelines. There's enough LNG facilities on the west coast, the east coast, and obviously even closer to us in Darwin, where we can move huge volumes of gas. So getting that to the market with the pipeline companies is actually going to be quite easy. And in time they will be there. I speak to them, and they're up for it. As I said, it's what they do. It's their gig is building infrastructure, and then we'll end up paying the tariff for moving the molecules of gas up the pipeline to market.
That's great. And the final pre-submitted question reads as follows. Empire's 1,345-metre Carpentaria 2H horizontal well was completed last year and will be fracked this year when the wet season ends. Given its location, how important do you rate their success for the Origin/Falcon project? Can one assume it's in the three companies' interest to swap data and when requested?
Yeah, I've answered part of that question already in terms of sharing data. Of course, it's in everyone's interest. And, in terms of this particular well, Empire's Carpentaria 2H well, all success in the Beetaloo is important to everyone. Their well, yeah, it's on the flank of the basin, east of our, recently Valkyrie 76 well. So it'll have a much better read through to the 76 well than it will, for example, to our Mungie wells, or even, to the Santos's Tanambarini wells. But independent of any success, as people stated, we're really excited about our own 76 anyway, regardless of the results that, good or bad for Empire. We're hoping for good results from Empire. But regardless, we will remain extremely excited about our Valkyrie 76. More of, I guess, of even higher interest to us might be the Tambourine Maverick well in closer proximity to our Valkyrie 76. So, all eyes are focused on that. And again, hopefully they too have success. Success breeds success, certainly in this kind of a play, even more so.
Thank you very much, Philip. That concludes the pre-submitting questions. And Philip, as you can see, we've received a number of questions throughout today's presentation. And thank you to all the investors for submitting their questions. Philip, could I just ask you to open up the Q&A tab and read out the questions and give responses where it's appropriate for you to do so, and then I'll pick up from you at the end.
So this is where I can read out a question, but I don't like the question and I have to give the answer, but no, I'm kidding. Yeah, so thanks, Robert F. Question, do I have a realistic target date for Beetaloo commercialization? It's not about Beetaloo commercialization because it's a vast basin. It's about getting to a notional declaration of commerciality, as I like to put it, which, if we flow, 2,500 MCF per 1,000 meter, so, multiply that up. If we're flowing 10,000 MCF a day from our 2,000 meter wells at Mungie by the end of that drilling and testing phase. And when I say by the end, by the end of the first 30 days, that to me is a declaration of commerciality, not for all the basin, but that's, a end of year Q1 event to reach that point. So the next question I have is Andy C. Any concerns about a change of government and changes to supportive policies? So the current government in power now, they were elected back in September 2016, re-elected and they're the ones who imposed the moratorium. So they weren't the good guys as far as I was concerned. Back then they weren't. They were re-elected in 2020. They're very supportive. We've embraced, everything that came out of the moratorium, the Pepper inquiry, all the recommendations. So the support, is quite visible and very supportive. They see all this huge increased level of activity that's gone on last year and again this year. The notion of the chance of real commercial success at the Beetaloo in the not too distant future is of significant interest to all politicians of either side of the aisle. In what's called the middle arm. The middle arm is that kind of piece that juts out in Darwin that hosts the two LNG terminals. The one operated by Santos and the other one by Impex. They've got like $10 billion of projects ready to go there. A lot of those contingent on Beetaloo gas success. So I would say we don't have any concerns about a change of government, or certainly no change in the government support. Will you put the colored map back up? Somebody's asking first. So let me just put the colored map. That's an easy one to do. I presume you mean this one here. Just in terms of this coloring here, this blue, as I said, is our 4.6 million acres. This brown is Santos Tambourine. This one here is Tambourine on its own, and then a lot of the yellow is Empire. So I hope that answers your question. Another one from Walter F. Time frame for exploration of the stacked plays. And the timing of that versus the sale of the asset. There's a really interesting question, actually, because it's something I don't often talk about, but a lot of other, particularly North American people looking at the Beetaloo, have a real view on the stacked play potential of the Beetaloo. And by that, I mean, we look at the Valkyrie, we all talk about the Valkyrie B shale, or the Amungi member B shale, as it's now officially known as. We don't often talk about the A and the C, and yet they're there. And the C is almost as good as the B. Fortunately, everyone is focused on the B right now, because I think the focus on one shale is great. But the C is there to be developed in this stacked play concept. And then you have, shale plays at a higher up, in terms of depth, that you can also bring in later on. But even in the Amungi itself, the A, the B, and the C, the timing of that is probably, a few years away. And I know what you're asking in terms of that versus the timing of a sale. Would we capture value, on selling, our share of the Beetaloo based on Amungi member B only shale being, categorized as commercial and having booked reserves on it? Would we get values for the C at that stage? Well, you'd certainly be looking for some, but you mightn't get the same value you would for the B. And it's probably a few years out before we start looking at the stacked play concept itself. But it's actually it's pretty real, nonetheless. So there's a few questions here I'm just glossing over, because it really talks about the sharing of information between Santos, Origin, and Empire. There's a few similar questions, and the answer is yes. And I'm actively trying to promote all collaboration. Question here: any news in the Karoo in South Africa? So for anyone who's not overly familiar with Falcon, we've a 7 million acre permit, known what's called a technical cooperation permit in South Africa in the Karoo, which we acquired when we made that application in 2010. We are still waiting for that TCP to be converted into an exploration permit, but in advance of that, they have to put all the regulatory framework in place, and they still haven't got there. So unfortunately, there's no great news on that front. And I think that concludes certainly all the questions that I can see on my screen. And I'll hand you back to Alessandro.
Yep, Philip, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time. I think you actually managed to address all the questions from investors. And of course, the company will review any further questions submitted today, and we'll be able to publish those on the Investor Meet Company platform. But just before redirecting investors to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to the company, could I just ask you for a few closing comments?
No, I think the main closing comment is this is the year. This is the most exciting year in the 1 billion year history of the Beetaloo. I think Senkos's latest note kind of had a nice headline reflecting that. And it is for lots of reasons, mostly because of the 2 wells that we're going to be drilling and the longer reach laterals off the same pad. We're very excited, fairly confident of success, but also our neighbors, what they're going to be doing. And then with the backdrop of this, market that we have and the pricing dynamics of this part of the world, all bodes pretty well for continued and increasing success at the Beetaloo.
Thanks once again for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, and I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of Falcon Oil and Gas, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good afternoon to you all.